10-Minute Jazz Lesson Podcast, episode 404. Hey, everybody, welcome back to episode 404 of the 10-Minute Jazz Lesson Podcast. Let's keep going on this beautiful Tad Dameron tune, Ladybird. So last time we talked about that backdoor 2-5-1 progression. And this week we're going to talk about the progression that's pretty unique to this tune. I think it's one of the coolest features of the tune, which is the last two measures of the song. We get this really, really awesome progression that goes from concert C major 7 to E flat major 7 to A flat major 7 to D flat major 7, and then we resolve that to C. And this is really cool for a number of reasons. So first, let's just talk about sort of what's going on here. The big thing that I think makes this progression so interesting is the fact that it's all parallel major chords. So normally we hear some dominant chords mixed in, some minor chords mixed in, all this kind of stuff. But when a chord is parallel, meaning that it's the same quality of chord after chord after chord after chord, it tends to have a really interesting quality to it. Because, functional harmony is just as much about chord movement as it is about chord quality, right? So the chord qualities play a big, big, big role into it. Imagine if I played this instead of, well, actually, I'm going to play the last two bars as they are. Okay. Now, I'm going to change the qualities of a couple of the chords. I'm not going to tell you which. And some of you might know exactly what I did, but doesn't that completely change the sound of the entire thing when I change the chord quality? So that's the first thing. It's all these parallel major chords. It's four major seventh chords in a row. And that really, really contributes to the way that it sounds and how cool it is. Now, the second thing is let's talk about the structure of this. Okay. So we've got C, moving to E flat, moving to A flat, moving to D flat, moving to C. And you could think about it in a couple of different ways, right? So the first one would be the tune is in the key of C. So it starts in C, it goes up a minor third to E flat, and then it starts going around the circle of fourths. So as soon as we get to that E flat major 7 chord, we go to A flat major, and then we go to D flat major. That's all circle of fourth movement, and then we resolve by going down a half step. Okay. The other way that I think is a really, really great way to think about it is we take a really, really common chord progression, which is 1, 6, 2, 5. So what if we thought about that in the key of C? So if we thought about C major 7, and then A minor 7, to D minor 7, to G7, to C major. That would be 1, 6, 2, 5. 1, 6, 2, 5, 1. Okay. Now, let's think about this. What if when we got to the 6th chord, we started thinking about tritone substitutions? So instead of A, we do E flat instead. Instead of D, we do A flat. And instead of G, we do D flat. There's the progression right there. So, we start on the 1 chord. We do a tritone substitution of 6, tritone substitution of 2, tritone substitution of 5, and then we resolve back to 1. And I think that's a good bet that he might have been thinking about that. And then just made them all major 7s to make it even more interesting. Okay? So, two good ways to think about it. At the end of the day, the chord progression is what it is, and we just need to learn how to play over it. Okay. So that's what I've done this week is we're going to go over some strategies. Actually, one strategy in particular that I really, really like. So if you look at the accompanying materials for this week's episode, you're going to see that I have these 5 things written out on the sheet that I call skeletons. And I think skeletons are a really, really good way to approach line writing, vocabulary writing. And basically, what a skeleton is I'm deciding what the first note I want to play over each chord is. And then I'm going to use that to inform the vocabulary that I write at the end of the day. And then whether I'm actually physically writing vocabulary, like writing it down on a piece of paper, or whether I am writing it on my instrument in real time, this stuff is really going to give you some skills over a chord progression like this and allow you to improvise freely over it eventually. Okay. So let's dive into these. So, my thinking behind these skeletons is that I want to create, in this case, a half note line because I'm going to think about the note that I want to play first over each one of these 4 chords. And I can do varying degrees of structure built into this, and we'll go over that as we go through the 5 different skeletons. So for skeleton number 1, I want to keep it to chord tones. Okay. So the note that I write over each chord is going to be 1, 3, 5, or 7. And that's really my only rule. But here's my second rule. I want the skeleton to sound good on its own. So here's what skeleton number 1 sounds like. So listen to that again. So I actually really like the way that that sounds just on its own as a half note, like contrapuntal line with a root in the bass and then the note that I'm choosing for the skeleton in the right hand. And if I like the sound of that line, then whatever I do to fill in the information is has a really good chance of sounding good. So I want to start with good source material and go from there. All right, let's look at skeleton number 2. This is exactly the same thing, um, where I'm choosing 1, 3, 5, or 7 over every chord as my skeleton of the line. But this obviously is going to sound way different. Notice that this one's all descending, and I'm just using different notes. So here's skeleton number 2. Really love the sound of that one. Cool. All right, skeleton number 3, exact same idea, chord tone over every single chord. And you're going to notice that this one has a completely different shape and a completely different sound. Let's listen to that one again. All right, let's go on. Skeleton number 4, same thing here. Do that one again. Now you'll notice that that one just has much, much bigger intervallic jumps than the one that came before it, right? So this is going to produce very, very different results when I go to sort of flesh out the line a little bit. And finally, skeleton number 5. But here is where you start to see just how deep you can go with this. Now I've said to myself, okay, well, I don't actually have to limit myself to just 1, 3, 5, and 7. Now I can incorporate nines as well. So skeleton number 5, you're going to notice that it starts with a ninth, and then in the second measure, it goes to a ninth. And then in the fourth chord, it also utilizes a ninth. And this is going to give me a completely different sound. Let's listen to that again because that takes a little bit of wrapping your ear around. So maybe you don't like that one because you haven't wrapped your ear around that progression enough. That's fine. Stick with chord tones for as long as you need to. Okay. All right. Now, what I've done is I've given you two examples on how to develop these skeletons. So the first one is developing skeleton number 3. And here's the thing, I could do 100 different examples on skeleton number 3. This is just one. So basically, what I'm doing is I'm using those starting notes from skeleton number 3, but I'm filling in the information. And in this case, I've done actually all eighth notes to fill in that information. So wow, like really cool line, right? And all I had to do was figure out the notes that I wanted to fill in between those skeleton notes that I had come up with before, right? Now, of course, I would write probably dozens of lines using just that one skeleton. I'd switch the rhythm up. I'd do all kinds of things to really, really flesh that out. But it results in a great line. It's just giving us a little bit of structure so that we have something that we can think about, that we can write around, which I think is really great. Okay, so let's look at skeleton number 5, which is the tricky one. And in this one, I've just written a much more like complicated line. I've really switched up the rhythm. I've done rests. I've done all kinds of stuff. So let's check out the one line that I've come up with skeleton 5. So, how far could you take this? The answer is really, really far. Okay. So, I've given you some of the raw materials. I've given you 5 skeletons here. And now it's up to you. Here's the thing, I can't do the work for you on this. Now it's up to you to come up with a million different ways to flesh out these skeletons and turn them into actual vocabulary. Okay. But this might be a good guide for you, a good starting point, and then you could sort of take charge from there and do what you want to do at the end of the day. So I hope this is helpful. If you would like to grab the PDF with the skeletons on it and the 2 examples, you can choose to support the podcast. That's how we keep this thing coming out, is from people just like you. And we use the Patreon platform. So if you go to our website, 10minutejazzlesson.com, and click on one of the Patreon banners, or if you go to patreon.com and you search for the 10-Minute Jazz Lesson podcast, you get all the information, how much it costs, what it looks like, but you do get the complete materials from every single episode, really, that we've ever done. So it's a pretty good deal, and it keeps the podcast coming out in high quality week after week. It basically allows us to keep doing this. Thank you to the new patrons this week. Thank you to Daniel and Ryan. Thanks for joining up, becoming members of the site, and to everybody that's over there supporting us. Thank you. We definitely could not do this without you. So again, that's our website, 10minutejazzlesson.com. Click on one of the Patreon banners, or patreon.com, search for the 10-Minute Jazz Lesson podcast. So get to work on this stuff. If you want to be able to play over the last 2 bars in a sort of functional, smooth, continuous fashion without stumbling and bumbling, this is a great way to do it. I've spent a lot of time in my life doing exactly this, and it really does work. So let me know what you think. Let me know if you have any questions, and we'll see you next week with another episode. Have a great weekend, everybody. Talk to you soon. Bye.